Well, one of the more weighty parts of my job as a minister is to preside over funerals. And maybe more than any other part of my work, funerals require both my feelings and my intellect to work in tandem. For instance, imagine if I were standing by the casket at a viewing where friends and loved ones are coming to pay their respects, and I'm standing there and I'm greeting those who are arriving, and I decide in that moment to just totally set my feelings aside and to respond entirely with my intellect. What if someone came in tears and they said something like, "Reverend, my God, we had no idea. We saw the obit in the paper, but it really didn't give much detail. We loved Jim so much and we hadn't seen him in a while. What on earth happened?" A purely intellectual response to this question would be something like, and forgive me because I know this is dark and horrifying to imagine, but a purely intellectual response to that question would be something like, "Well, thank you for being here. Yes, it may have seemed sudden, but Jim was headed toward this end for quite a long time. Around 7 a.m. on Tuesday, he was eating breakfast, and his heart was unable to get blood through the veins of his body to his brain due to blockage in them from years and years of eating an extremely high cholesterol diet and engaging in little to no exercise. You can observe Jim's lifeless body here in this casket if you wish, and please sign the guest book for the family on your way out. Thank you so much for coming." That's so dark. My humor is sick. I'm so sorry. But that would be horrifying, right? If I were to respond that way to someone at a viewing. I mean, my goodness, why have some feeling, right? Now, however, if I were to respond that way, would it be true? Yes. But would it be the best way to respond at that particular moment? No. A person with any kind of self-awareness for the context that they are in would answer something more like, "Thank you for being here. Yes, it was very sudden and it's very sad. Jim had a stroke on Tuesday, and I'll miss him very much too. What a wonderful person he was. He brought joy to so many people's lives, and I can't imagine the world without him." This would also be true, but said with feeling in mind. Now, it's likely in your own life, in your own persona, in your own interiority sitting here today, that you are predisposed as either navigating your life as a thinker or a feeler. And if you're not sure which one you are, take some time this week to ask someone in your life that knows you well which one you are, and they'll answer in a matter of seconds, and they'll be right. And neither of these predispositions are right nor wrong. It's just who we are. It's just how we're wired. But they do affect how we approach and process things in our lives. What's more, they also affect how we process this thing that we call belief or faith. Many of us in this room this morning believe what we believe because of what we feel about a thing. Others of us here in this room this morning believe what we believe because of what we think about a thing. And both of those camps can often feel compelled and feel compelled to make others feel compelled to believe for the reasons that they do. But does it have to be binary? Why can't it be both? And I would posit today that thinking and feeling, whichever one of those you are just different ways of processing the same batch of information. And depending on the context, one might be superior to the other at a particular time. For instance, at a funeral. But often, thinking and feeling point to the same conclusion. And this, in my opinion, is the very best way to process information. This is also precisely the kind of person that our passage is speaking to today. A person who is in touch with their deepest feelings, and yet also a person of reason and logic and intellectual honesty. Again, the passage reads, "You've suffered grief in all kinds of trials. These have come so that the proven genuineness of your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may result in glory and honor when Christ is revealed. Though you have not seen him, you love him, and even though you don't see him now, you believe in him and are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy. For you are receiving the end result of your faith, the salvation of your souls." You ever feel that way in your life? I sure do. We go through stuff. Stuff in our families, stuff in our friendships, stuff in our careers, even stuff in our bodies. And they're difficult. They ought to be things that crush us, that do us in, that make us quit. And yet, in going through them and absorbing the shock of them in our lives, we somehow still manage to have the capacity to lean on and trust in God, and maybe even feel that God is with us. It is completely without reason, but we often feel like God is with us in the midst of the things that we suffer. Another passage from the Gospel of Mark, one of my favorite passages in Scripture. It seems to mirror so much my own struggles with belief, more than just about any other passage. It says this, a story about Jesus. "Then one of the crowd answered and said, 'Teacher, I brought you my son who has a mute spirit. And wherever it seizes him, it throws him down. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. So I spoke to your disciples that they should cast it out, but they could not.' So he asked his father, 'How long has this been happening to him?' And the father said, 'From childhood. And often he has thrown him both into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us.' And Jesus said to him, 'If you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes.' And immediately the father of the child cried out and said with tears, 'Lord, I believe, help my unbelief.'" I love the honesty of that. That is where I live a majority of my life. Sometimes even with tears. saying, Lord, I believe. But there are these great big gaps in me. These great big parts in me that just aren't there yet. There's a part of me that believes, and if I'm honest, there's a part of me that does not. Please help me. That is what it is to be honest about faith. Just like there is no darkness without light, there is also no faith without doubt. We are beautiful paradoxes. We think, yet we feel. We get stuck in our reasoning, and yet at times we find ourselves spontaneously rejoicing. Parts of us want to recoil, while other parts of us just want to respond. And guess what? That's not your fault. It's okay. That's how you were made. That's what it is to be human. Thinking and feeling are just different ways of processing the same batch of information, even if that information is divine in nature. I have been on a miso soup kick as of late. Does anyone here like miso soup? Does anyone even know what that is? Okay, good. Pretty culturally aware congregation here. I love miso soup. And up until recently, I never made it at home. And now I make it all the time. It's delicious. It's good for me. It's quick. It only takes a second to make. And it lasts forever. So what I've been doing, and I don't know how long this will last, at the beginning of my week, I make this big pot of miso. And then I can reheat it during the week for lunches and dinners, etc. I even had it for breakfast yesterday. It was delicious. A bit high sodium. Not as much as Jim from the story of the funeral. Fictional guy, by the way. But anyway, one of the things that I've been noticing about miso soup, and I noticed this like when I get it with sushi too, but now that I'm making it, I notice it even more, is that it takes constant stirring, even after it's fully cooked. If you leave miso soup sit out, in a matter of seconds, the soybean paste and the fish stock will start separating from one another. I have a picture of it here. I made this Thursday. On the left, you see how it's nice and solid, and then on the right, you can see it's almost like curdling and starting to separate. That was 30 seconds in between those two shots. And if you don't stir the miso soup back together before you take a bite, it doesn't taste right. What's more, you might get a spoonful of incompleteness. And as I was sitting there, I was actually eating miso soup while I was studying this passage this week. And I don't know why, but God taught me a lesson in this bowl of miso soup. That's just how entertaining my life is, folks. But as I was studying this passage and eating this soup, it got to thinking about the way that it becomes separated and how that's often what it's like to be this one being that is both a thinking and a feeling being at the same time. Really, the truth is, unless we make a conscious effort to stir ourselves, our lives won't be what they're meant to be. What do I mean by stir yourself? What I mean is, you have to make a deliberate choice to combine thinking and feeling in your life if there's going to be balance. We have to keep these two parts of us constantly mixed together because that's what makes life most flavorful. If you're a person that rolls your eyes at things like history and science and logic, and you're just wired to always do the first thing that you feel without even thinking about it, I have a feeling, then I act on it. If you're a person that's like that, stirring yourself in those moments looks like pausing when you have a feeling and thinking about your actions before you act. If you are on the other side of the picture, a person who has a constant need for everything to make sense logically and logistically, stirring yourself in those moments looks like pausing and trying to feel what's going on. Maybe asking, if I act on this logically in this moment, how will that affect the feelings of those around me? How will it affect the feelings of those that I love? How will it make me feel even though I don't want to feel? Whatever you're predisposed to, stirring yourself, just doing it, just trying it, will give you a more balanced life. Some questions that I love to ask people who, because I'm the type of person that gets stuck in my head. And so I know how to bother people that get stuck in their head. One of the questions I like to ask people that get stuck in their heads frequently is, why are you in love with your partner? Or why do you love your kids? What's the reason for that? Explain that to me logically. And when I do, you can see them just kind of going, they just kind of lock up, and they usually just shrug and they answer something like, I don't know, I just do, I always have. I just love them. Think about that for a second. Is something like love just an evolutionary trait that mammals